The tall, gangly thing?
Hello and welcome. Today I'm joined with Ramblinnn, fresh off of his third place finish at the mid-set finale, one of the titans of competitive teamfight tactics. Ramblinnn, thank you so much for being here. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing all right. It's a pleasure to be back on the interview.
No, yeah, I mean, we sat down a little bit ago, not too long ago, but for anyone who's watching this and who didn't see that interview, who doesn't know too much about you, why don't you just go ahead first and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm Ramblinnn. Hopefully you figured that out by now. I play a lot of TFT. Been getting a little more involved in the competitive scene, but I've always been here playing TFT ever since that one. So one of my favorite games and one of my favorite communities to be a part of.
Now, I mentioned before you're fresh off this amazing finish at mid-set finale. You got third, but actually, so I talked about this online. Some people may have seen it. You actually had the best average placement among the entire event. So to some people, they may say that you actually came in first. To me, I would make that argument personally, but I want to know expectations going into the event. How did you expect yourself to actually perform?
The thing about TFT is it's really hard to have any static expectations like, oh, I'm going to do this weekend, because there's so many variables that play, both from your own play and from everybody else you're playing against, what the patch is. So going in, I'm not expecting to go third. I'm not expecting to go first. Not expecting to go anything, honestly. I'm just expecting to do my best, and that's what I did.
And I wanted to talk about this a little bit later, but actually I want to talk about it now and to kind of bounces off this idea of consistency in teamfight tactics. I mean, you're regarded as one of the best in North America, and we often see that even the very best can't always expect to place first. Sometimes they can't even always expect to make the final day. I mean, we saw that with the Zon Cup with you, for instance, not being able to make the final day. And I want to know, actually, in your opinion, do you feel like we'll ever be able to see that level of consistency in TFT where one player can dominate the competitive scene, whether that is placing first and first and first, or just making it to the finals over and over again?
I think that's not something that you'll see with the current competitive setup, which is, these 5-game, 6-game tournament days, where that's a really small sample size when you compare it to how many games are played on ladder. And like I said, there's so many things that can go wrong in just any individual game that can completely toss you out of the running, just because you might have one bad game yourself, but you also might have one bad game from the game side where you just really couldn't have done much. So when it comes to consistency, I think there's you have a certain level of control, of course, but sometimes the odds are just stacked against you. So I think as long as we have these tournaments that are so short run, you can't expect anybody to make it through every time.
Now, a little bit later, we're going to talk about the competitive landscape and maybe some other setups that we could actually see. But for now, I want to talk about the fact that you qualified for a spot at regionals. In set 5, you kind of earned yourself this title of the best player not at regionals. You weren't quite able to make it there. This time around, you've already locked in your spot before 6.5 has even started. So I just want to know, what does it mean for you to guarantee a spot in regionals so soon?
It's a big relief for sure. It's just one less thing I have to worry about. Just as the same way, I qualified for the mid set as soon as possible. I made it, first at Piltover, and now I qualified for regionals as soon as possible. So that's a complete turnaround from last set. But it also just means that I just don't have to worry about it as much. I don't have to stress about those qualifier points, because after Zone Cup, my qualifier points are a little on the lower side. So now I can just focus on practicing, and I still get to play in the Innovation Cup, which is I'm glad to know, but I don't have to worry too much about getting my highest placement as much as I would love to. It's not the end of the world if I don't.
Interesting. So you're still competing in Innovation Cup, assuming that you actually, qualify for it.
Sure, that's the plan. I still have to get the invite, because I don't get the automatic invite that the other players that 5th or 8th at mid-set got. But I can go and I can qualify through ladder and play and compete for money, but also just the practice and the fun of it. For sure, I'd look forward to it.
You feel like it's important to kind of get those reps in when you're actually looking to compete in tournaments versus just ladder?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's a completely different experience, really, because there's nobody's ever playing to win as much on ladder as they are in a tournament. And then, of course, the level of competition is that little bit extra higher that you can't find even in a scrim lobby. So just those opportunities are really hard to pass by. You really got to take advantage of them.
Now, something we saw for the first time ever in set 6 was the rise of the TFT power rankings in North America. And this is a list put together by the Don't Talk If You Don't Know panel and podcast. If whoever's watching hasn't checked that out, I definitely encourage you to. But Ramblinnn here was topping the charts on pretty much everyone's ballot. I believe on the final list that was put out before mid-set, Ramblinnn placed somewhere around third. I want to say third was yeah. So two things I want to know. One, how do you feel about your spot on the list? And two, what do you attribute the growth we've actually seen in your play too.
So I'm not somebody that likes to think too much about where I stack up against everybody else, and I think it's interesting to talk about and hear their thoughts. At least I wouldn't I want to give mine too much, just because I focus more on myself than everybody else, you know. So I don't really care too much about comparing myself with everyone else. But I mean, it's awesome to be anywhere near the top, first, third, top 5, whatever. I mean, it's a little surreal sometimes because I feel like, yeah, I'm pretty good, but I never think like, wait, I'm the best. I never really stop and think about it like that. So it's really cool to get that level of praise from pretty much the entire community, and especially from the podcast itself, which I think they're doing an awesome job with. I agree, you should definitely check them out. And you talked about like my level of growth. I don't think it's so much that I changed anything specific, but if I want to attribute to anything in particular, it'd just be how much I'm enjoying the set. Comparing set 5 to set 6, it's really hard to put in that level of dedication and the number of hours to get better when you're not enjoying it. So set 5 was all right. I wasn't a big fan of the first half. The second half, you know, I started playing a little more again, but at that point, it's too late to really do anything competitive wise. But set 6, I mean, I play a lot less than everybody else, but those hours you don't see, I'm watching. I'm enjoying watching the set and learning about it and seeing everybody else's takes on the set. So I think just that fun aspect is underrated.
I don't want to hit it over the head too much because I know you talked about it a lot in our last interview, but something that people always talk about when they talk about you as a player is your approach to improvement, which people say is more academic. It's more scholarly. You're watching, you're thinking, you're reviewing rather than just spamming games. For anyone who doesn't actually know, can you just kind of give a quick breakdown on how you try to improve in TFT?
Sure. So I play, you know, somewhat regularly. I'm not slamming games, but I'll play 4 or 5 games, you know, a day when I'm trying to really improve. And you know, I stream, so I got to get in my hours for that too. But it's really just making sure you're getting the most out of your time. And if you spend all of that time playing, a lot of that time is going completely to waste. And yeah, you might, you know, you can have fun, of course. It's a video game after all. So if I'm having fun, I'll play more. But if you're just playing games, slamming games over and over, and not really changing anything about your routine, not changing anything about how you're thinking, not considering other angles that maybe you would have never come up with yourself, you're missing out if you're not going and you're watching streams, you're reading whatever social media you like to consume, even just Reddit, Twitter, just basic stuff like that. Just see what people are talking about. See what you're missing out on that you weren't coming up with on your own. I think you can balance that with playing and get the most out of it that way.
Now, long term, I kind of want to hear about your goals with TFT. I mean, I feel like for a lot of TFT players, the goal is like to become a streamer, to get signed to an org. So I kind of want to know, like, long term, do you have any specific goals that you're working towards, or are you just taking it as it comes?
Sure, I think it's not so much a checklist that I'm trying to mark off right now, but as much it's like a pool of things I would like to move into, and that pool consists of, yes, signing with an org, and right now that'd be making it through regionals to worlds. That'd be awesome. That's the next step. I haven't made it to worlds yet, so I'd like to add that to my resume. But in general, I mean, I'm just trying to become a streamer, not necessarily become the biggest streamer, just, you know, make a living for myself, become a consistent streamer, become a home people can come back to and enjoy being a community you can be a part of.
So apart from, obviously, I mean, you're streaming a lot right now as you're playing TFT, but you feel like you actually would want to stream full time for, you know, long term than just like your success in TFT right now. You actually feel like you'd want to stream further than just maybe the next couple months or the next year?
I think so. It's the only thing I've really been able to get this passionate about, and there's other stuff maybe I could consider going paths down, but this is something I just, even if I don't even think of it as a job, and that's really cool that I can make it into one. So we're right on that bubble right now where I think if I put in that extra level of effort, I can keep pushing forward. But it doesn't have to be TFT. Eventually TFT, you know, will slow down and I'll have to find a new home, but for now, sure, I think TFT is a good stepping stone to get there.
Speaking of finding a new home, I mean, TFT was actually a new home for you once upon a time. Something I didn't know the last time we sat down was that you actually have quite a storied history in another title, that is Destiny. Now, I don't really know all that much besides the fact that I know you played Destiny. Can you just kind of let me know what's the deal with Destiny? How long did you play it? Who were you in that scene?
So just for anybody that's not familiar with Destiny, it's a shooter game made by Bungie. I started playing when the first beta came out. I don't know how many years ago now, 6, 7, something like that. But I played it pretty much all the way up until TFT started to kind of spike. And I was still playing both at the same time, maybe around set 1, set 2. But Destiny for me was, I mean, how I got into streaming, how I got into that extra, like that extra level of video games. You know, I was always playing games, but I was never involved with anything bigger than just my own side of things. But I was able to find a consistent rhythm for me, which was like what was called the Trials of Osiris. It was a game mode in Destiny where basically you would team up with a couple buddies and you'd go into this little mini tournament kind of thing. It was never anything super serious, not a real competitive scene, but you could basically, you would pair up and you try to win 7 games in a row. And if you win that many games in a row, you get extra loot at the end. What a lot of people do still, and what I did most of my time playing Destiny, was helping people get those 7 wins and get their loot. And it was a really fun community experience to get to play with a lot of different people and show them to the lighthouse, is what they called it.
Now, when I was doing some research about this, I did actually see an article online with that links to a YouTube video, which I'm assuming is the same channel that you probably would use for TFT stuff. But it's essentially a video of you playing against 3 other people in this game mode and beating all 3. And then it's a whole thing about like how the loot system didn't quite work in Bungie or something like that. Were you actually like a prominent figure in the Destiny scene?
I was like tier 2, if you want to call it that. I wasn't the biggest, if you compare like to TFT as an example. I wasn't on Soju's level or anything like that, but I was that next step where everybody that was kind of familiar with me, they knew like, oh, that's Ramblinnn. I know who he is. He plays Trials. He's a good PvP player. Go watch him when I want to watch some PvP. But I never made it into that next, higher tier bubble, but I was able to make a place for myself. I was able to get partnered. I played with a name that some people might recognize as DrLupo. He also got his start with Destiny. We played Destiny together. We got partnered at the same time. So if you want to talk to anybody about his story, he's got a pretty good one. But I was right there with him.
Wow, it's incredible. I had no idea. That's very cool. And then eventually, obviously, you transition into TFT. Well, I don't actually quite see the jump between like the shooter to like the auto battler strategy game. How did you actually get into TFT?
It wasn't anything specific to the games. It was just really that I had been involved in Twitch at that point. I mean, you don't just watch the game you play. So eventually I found my way into the TFT directory when it was first coming out. Watched some Scar, watched some Toast, and it looked fun enough for me to give it a shot. I had never played League at that point, but just the characters themselves seemed like they had a lot of personality, which is kind of what drew me to TFT. When you look at it compared to some of the other auto chess games that have been in the past, it felt like I could actually not care about the character's story, but I could get attached to them and like feel like I'm playing with some really unique champions.
And obviously, I mean, years later, you're still playing TFT. What is it about the game that keeps you coming back?
It's got to be the community. There's nothing better. Destiny community was awesome, but even that I wouldn't say compared to the TFT community. I've just really enjoyed my time being a part of it and making a place for myself. And of course, I love the game. I love the devs. I love Mortdog. He does a great job with it. It's awesome to have that level of community interaction. I don't want to go too much into it. The Destiny devs and like the community managers, they're not quite on that same level. So it's really nice to be able to pass that feedback on and feel like you're really being heard.
Well, speaking of community, I actually have a handful of questions from the community themselves who have some things they want to hear from you, Ramblinnn. So the first one is actually coming from Kayna. I feel like everybody knows Kayna in every single Twitch chat in the TFT community. Probably a mod for most of them as well. But Kayna wants to know who you think the 3 North American representatives will be at the World Championships this set.
So we talked about a little bit earlier how it's hard to have expectations for anything. At this point, we didn't even know exactly who I was playing in the regionals.
That's fair. That's very fair.
You can make a pretty good guess, but I can give you a couple names, and and you come back and look at it later. Like, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. It's fun to think about, like I said. So I don't want to name myself just because that's no fun. But
sure,
I'm gonna throw out. Let's go with Socks. It's hard to pass up Socks. He's had a couple of good showings, couple not as good showings, but when it comes down to it, it's really hard to doubt Socks. And I think he's had a really good time with this set, even taking care of his son. So if he has the time available, I think he can make it for sure. I'm going to give you Spencer. You've talked about him plenty yourself. He's the
absolutely
best player in NA. I don't disagree with it. So I think even if he didn't make it, through mid set, I'm sure he's going to be there at regionals, and I'm sure he's going to make a good showing. So I wouldn't be any bit opposed to him making it through the Worlds again. And then let's go with a little bit of different name here. I'm going to throw in Asa. He's been pretty consistent so far this set.
Wow, okay.
He hasn't been at the very, very top, but in terms of, if you want to look at anybody that's growing the most this set, you can look at him or Spicy, and I think it's hard to honestly doubt him when you go and you look at his play, and it seems like he's got a really good thing going for him, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him up there at Worlds either.
Wow, I love that. And I will say, for anyone watching that you might have seen me talk about this on some of the other content I posted, Asa, one of two players to have made it to final day in all 4 events in set 6. So Asa definitely been a tournament threat. If he can continue that consistency, I agree with Ramblinnn. I think it would be really cool to see him on the world stage. Now I've got one more question for you. This one coming from Zugz, who wants to know, what change would you like to see most in the current competitive landscape?
I think there's a handful of them. It's hard to say that any one in particular is the most important, but I'll just kind of give you a small rundown of what comes to mind. And they ask for our feedback, which is, again, awesome that they do reach out to us. They want us to know what we think would be an improvement. Of course, they can't make all those changes, but it'd be cool to see the most obvious one to be a bigger prize pool, just more to play for, especially in these the Zon Cup and the Piltover Cup. You're playing for a qualification, but ultimately you're not even playing for a first place, which is a little anticlimactic at the end of the weekend to make it through 3 days and get $600. It's like,
Sure.
yeah, it's something, but I would love to play for more. And then just going off directly of that is, I think the scheduling of the tournaments could use a lot of work, both in terms of how they're spaced out, and I think it worked out a little poorly for this set in particular because of the holidays. But to go from the Piltover Cup at the very beginning of the set and then basically almost 2 months off before the next major tournament feels really bad to not have really much in between, and especially for me who couldn't even play in the Challenger Series. So to be locked out of that, I'm just sitting here waiting for the next one. But not just when they happen in the set, but also when they happen in relative to the patches. I really dislike having those tournaments 2 days after the patch. It's just happened with both the Zon Cup and the Med Set. And I could talk about how that affects your tourney play, but this is even worse for the players that don't have that time that I do to spare to invest in those first couple of days. So for the players that really, especially if other people are competing in day one of those tournaments, they just get no practice pretty much whatsoever. They're just kind of winging it, and I think that's a little unfair.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that those two problems actually go hand in hand, where if the prize pool themselves don't supplement an income for someone to be full-time in TFT, then the context in which the tournament exists shouldn't require someone to play full-time in order to actually have a chance at doing well, or, to increase their shot at doing well. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, a lot of wisdom there. And I think I speak for you when I say that anyone who's criticizing the competitive landscape, or most people who criticize the competitive landscape, do it knowing that the people behind it, especially, shout out to Giant Slayer, who have absolutely carried the North American competitive circuit up to this point, are putting their complete all into it. And all this criticism comes with the acceptance that they have done so much for us up to this point in time. Now, Ramblinnn, that's actually all the questions I do have for you. But before we go, is there anything you'd like to shout out?
Oh man, we just gotta give a shout out to the community. It's hard not to appreciate everything they do for each other and for me. So both the community, and then even look at the dev side, and you mentioned Giant Slayer, just stuff, all the people that make TFT what it is. I'm very thankful for it.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, Ramblinnn, thank you again for sitting down with me. For everyone watching, thank you for watching all the way through this interview. For more TFT coverage and content, make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.